Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video I wanted to talk about this lens right here. It's the Fuji 16mm f1.4 lens from Fujifilm. It is arguably one of the best lenses that Fuji actually produced for their X-mount sensor cameras, and I actually don't disagree with that. And for the past 1.5 years that I've been using Fuji, this lens has been on my Fuji cameras 90% of the time or 95% of the time. It is that good. It is very versatile, very reliable, and very practical lens to use. That being said, it also has its own pros and cons, and this is pretty much essentially like a mini review, but also pretty much my thought on this lens. And if you're thinking about this lens, what advice or what thought I can give you, as well as hoping that this video will probably help you to decide whether or not this lens is right for you and things like that. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. So before I go into about like pros and cons on this lens and my thoughts on this lens, I would like to actually explain a little bit of my background story with shooting with Fujifilm. So it started with like 1.5 years ago when I decided to actually invest in Fujifilm system cameras, because my girlfriend is a Fuji shooter, and when traveling together I just thought it would be nice to actually have the same system camera, because I'm mainly a Canon shooter, like for professional work and for travel and for everything. And I also use or used to use Panasonic as well as Nikon, things like that. So always traveling with like 2 or 3 other system cameras, it's kind of like a pain in the neck. And if we're traveling a lot, sometimes we can just save a lot of cost and a lot of weight and a lot of redundant accessories, things like that, if we just use the same system. So we can share the same accessories like chargers, lenses, batteries, and other sort of related camera equipment that can be saved in the luggage, like space-wise, things like that. And I wasn't really into the Fuji colors at first, and I just thought I'd just give it a try first with my X-T20 at the time, and then slowly I upgraded to X-T1, X-T2, things like that. And yeah, that being said, this lens has always been the main lens that I have on my Fuji cameras. Well, any of the Fuji cameras that I would be shooting. So yeah, it's really a testament to how much I really like this lens and why I would prefer this lens over other lenses. So now let's get into the video. So for the cons first, because I like starting with the cons and I don't really have a lot of cons for this lens. So first would be, well, the manual focus. A lot of people actually like the manual focus switch, but I do shoot videos as well, and this manual focus ring is, well, not really the ring in particular, but rather the motor of the manual focus. It is focused by wire, but I'm kind of spoiled by Canon's focus by wire, which is very accurate and very precise. And if I turn the ring, there's no delay, which this lens does have delay of like just a fraction of a second. But if you're used to having no delays at all with electronic manual focusing, then this is kind of a letdown a little bit. And also, if I'm in autofocus, whether it's in photography or in video, and I'm not sure if my talent is really in focus with the autofocus, and if I just switch back to manual focus, it could just get my subject or talent out of focus, because it goes back to the previous manual focus mark that I left it. So sometimes if the client is, or if the talent or if the subject is just maybe 1.5 meters away, and my previous manual focusing setting point was like the closest distance or the furthest infinity distance, then you know my subject or my talent will definitely be out of focus. So you know, it's hard to subtly override that autofocus points, and that can just be really frustrating if I'm just doing like a job interview or a commercial shoot or vlogging, or you know, any sort of video or photography work where critical focus can be you know, a need or necessity. things like that. But that's pretty much the main con that I have about this lens. So now let's move on into the pros. So first, what I really love about this lens is how small this lens is. This lens is a 24mm equivalent to the 35mm sensor size, and to be honest, it is a funny focal length for me. I usually use 16 to 35 on my Canon, and then I just jump all the way to my 85 1.2, things like that. So this is kind of like an in-between lens, not wide, not telephoto, not standard. It's weird for me, but I love using this lens simply because a lot of times it is wide enough, and there's that f1.4, which is very nice because this is a crop frame censored camera, and the f1.4 is roughly f1.8 or f2 actually on a full frame, and that can be an advantage when I'm traveling because I can just let in a lot of light and have still decently a lot of things in focus, which gets me to the next point of sharpness. This lens is really nice and sharp lens, and not only in the center but also in the corners. So when traveling a lot, sometimes I don't have time to set up the tripod and get that glamorous shot. I just want to get like certain nice shots just for the sake of having a nice memory, and that f1.4 allows me to get really nice sharp results when, let's say, if I'm on a boat, a taxi boat, and trying to take a picture of a temple when it's already pitch dark. So yeah, there's that. And the optics itself has a really nice contrast control and flaring control, so if you point this lens straight to the sunlight or straight to a light source, it will just not create like a crazy blob of blares, if that makes sense, and blobs of flares, sorry, if that makes sense. And you know, as nice as that sound, the starburst effect, if you're into that, which if you're taking long exposure, for example, and you're using like f13, f14, what have you, then the starburst isn't really pleasing on this lens. That is the one down thing that I find weird. Like, the optic quality is already very nice, but for some reason they cannot really make the starburst effect pleasant looking. It's very normal looking. Whereas if you compare to like Nikon and Canon lenses and some of the nice Zeiss lenses, the starburst effect when you do like really high aperture for long exposure, or if you're taking picture with the sun like shines through the camera, it shines into the lens, there's nice starburst effect. You know, those nice Zeiss lenses and Canon and Nikon lenses can do a much better job of doing the starburst, but that's just nitpicking, and it's not really that important for me at least. But that's something I also noticed from this lens. This lens is also nicely weather sealed. The build quality is really nice. As I said, it is a really small and tiny lens, for me at least, and if you take off the lens hood, if you're a person who doesn't like lens hood, then it's actually even much smaller footprint. But most of the time I do leave my lens hood on, well actually all of the time, because it is already a very small lens, so to me that's just fine. I usually just put this in my camera bag with the lens hood facing like this anyway, because this is my street photography camera as well, so if I take it out, I just want the lens hood to be there. I don't want to fiddle with things, and compared to my full frame where the lens is already big, so I always have to take my lens hood and reverse it if I want to use it, things like that. So that's definitely a positive on here. Another positive I have is how close the lens can focus. So, you know, if I'm here, the lens already is focusing, like it's really close to the camera, like yeah, around here, and I'm just like this much away from the lens, and yeah, it's really amazing. So that just brings it to the point of like, yes, it is a really funny focal length for me personally to use, but I can get used to this lens focal length. It's a 24mm equivalent to full frame. I have vlogged with this lens so many times on my Fuji system, and I have used this lens for my documentary work, for my portrait work, for, well, work as in personal project, things like that, for travel work, well, project things, and the results has been really much, like pretty much amazing coming from this lens. So yeah, in terms of sharpness, contrast control, like image quality wise, there's nothing to complain. For video, I mean, image wise it's very good, but technicality of the lens, it might not be a good lens to use because of this manual focus ring thing, and the motor also makes a little bit of sound, but depending on the type of video you're shooting, it might not really matter, because let's say if you're doing an interview where you might have a lavalier mic or an external boom mic, things like that, it will definitely not pick up this autofocusing motor motor in the lens, sorry. And yeah, but here's my thought, I really highly recommend this lens to you if you really like the 24 or 16mm focal range, but here's the thought, I think it's really a weird lens to also start out with. I know I started out the Fuji system with this lens, well, apart from the actual kit lens that came with the camera, but when I really invested into the Fuji, I pretty much started out with this lens, and it is still being the main lens on my Fuji cameras. But you know, if you're, let's say, traveling a lot, you might find that something like a 10 to 24 more versatile, or even 12mm from Rokinon more versatile, or the 18 to 55 more versatile, because there are zooms, or there's the ultra wide, the Rokinon being 12mm, which is much wider than this one, that, you know, can get a lot of things done. But if you like autofocusing system lens, and it's not too expensive, and it goes all the way to 1.4, and it's decently wide, then you can't really go wrong with this lens. But yeah, that's just a thought. But nowadays, when I travel somewhere with my Fuji system, I tend to always try to photograph with this particular focal range. It is hard, but sometimes you have to find a certain viewpoint or a certain perspective to use this lens. But otherwise, that f1.4 is just really, really nice to have, and you can get really, really creative with the 1.4, even when you're traveling or when you're doing landscape photography. It is such a nice lens to use. And yeah, I realize I don't usually make a lot of lens videos. That's why this one is also rather quite weird, but I just feel like making a video about this lens because I love it so much. And I haven't really seen a lot of videos about this lens, at least by the time when I got this lens. Yeah, so that's it for this video. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's on my website. The link is down in this description below. It's totally free. I will not ask you for anything, not even for email. I will not bombard you with any newsletters, crap, things like that. So yeah, thank you very, very much for watching. If you have any questions on this lens or on any other things, please comment down below or send me an Instagram message or whatever. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and have fun shooting. Bye.